I can talk to them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please would you take your seats? Excuse me, we would like to start. Thank you. So we are not so many in the room now, but I hope that others will come and join us. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion on behalf of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. At a personal level, it's also an honor to be with you today. We have a great panel of speakers who will bring different perspectives on the frameworks that must be in place to support a green recovery, the environmental architecture, which is in the title of this panel. These include the expected law on green recovery, which was just mentioned, which I happen to know the Ministry of Economy is aware of, so that's good. But also laws and existing laws and regulations that underpin processes from licensing and permitting, environmental impact assessment, and expertise for individual projects, to strategic environmental assessment for broader development plans and programs, and things like ecological restoration as well. And it was good to hear these topics being raised in the plenary panel this morning. These processes involve numerous governmental institutions that will need to work effectively together to accelerate Ukraine's green recovery. And as we will hear, these processes are dependent too on the participation of the public and of other stakeholders to ensure transparency and accountability and informed decision-making. And these processes also ensure that developments meet the needs and expectations of the population, that designs benefit from the insights they can bring, and much more. And finally, decision-making on development for a green recovery is dependent also on the availability of data, sufficient quality data, and information about the environment, and we'll be hearing more about that. So we actually have 3 questions to address. And maybe I would actually begin with Elena Kravchenko, who is a chair, I believe, of the executive director and member of the board of the organization Environmental People Law. Maybe you can tell us about mechanisms to enhance meaningful public participation in environmental decision-making during reconstruction, and how can civil society contribute effectively? Thank you.
Thank you. Is it work? Can you hear? Yeah. Я, можливо, почну трошки ширше, тому що доступ до
информации. I guess I'll start with a wider perspective as access to information and the involvement of society. It's a part of a modern architecture that we want to have. Now, in order to tell and to debate what sort of modern management architecture we're willing to have, it's important to kind of realize what do we have as of now. And that was already mentioned by my counterparts during the plenary session in the morning. So we have a lack of transparency and cross-sectoral approaches for the environment. Now, without this cross-sectoral approaches, it's impossible to have a green recovery or the access to a reliable information and the true participation of the society in the decision-making. Now, the next problem or challenge is that we still have, over all of these 30 years and until 2014, until the beginning of the war, until 2022, until that is the full-scale invasion. So we still have the post-Soviet management system over the environment. And this kind of post-Soviet system, it it prevents from, the real ability to build back better. Now, how can we build back better when we still have an old Soviet environment management system? Now, that old system, it does not comply with the modern principles of public management, meaning the advanced principles or the modern principles, they kind of say that the policy formulation or those who develop the policies, there should be a division. So certain bodies should develop the policy. Now the other bodies should implement that. You cannot kind of define something, then implement that, and monitor over yourself. That is why we have a chaos. That is why we have all the challenges. That is the 29 directives. They were not harmonized by the period of 2030. So now we have to harmonize with all the EU lands. And there's over 200 directives that we still need to make sure we kind of transpose. And that is all very difficult considering we still have an old management system. Now, talking about the management architecture, we have to understand that modern architecture for environment management is very kind of limited. It's fragmentary. It's non kind of consistent. And some of the elements in this management that we have as of now, some of them are lacking. I mean, the Ukraine currently doesn't have an advanced or the modern system of environment monitoring. We have a law that was passed by the Verkhovna Rada, but in the transitionary provisions, it say that this law will become valid, will enter into force after a certain period, after the end of the martial law period. Now, in certain sectors, and I can see some of my colleagues dealing with the monitoring of the water resources and monitoring of the atmospheric air, we could see that in some of the sectors, now, despite the overall system of state monitoring is not being established, there's just a very diverse initiatives. But you see, they have to be based on solid principles, on certain requirements, on single requirements. Now, when we have this foundation, then we are able to develop different directives or directions based on single requirements of the legislation or single platform, but we don't have them. We don't have a system of modern environmental control. Now, well, it's not there during the martial law period. I'm not talking about the advanced system. Our system is corrupted, not transparent, not accountable. There is a big pressure on the business, and the business is responding, is pressing back. But really, this environmental control is the basis for the sectoral reforms. I mean, 70% of all the successive sectoral reforms is all about the modern, transparent, business-friendly state environmental control. But whenever we're talking about the fact that Ukraine would need to harmonize its legislation with the EU, because in 2030, we're supposed to become an EU member nation if we will comply with all the requirements. Now, one of the important directives is the Directive 3599 on the environmental compliance and the criminal responsibility for tampering with the environment. So the third institutional reform should be the modern system for the monitoring, the modern control that complies with the European requirements, principles, and standards, and the adequate legal responsibility for damaging the environment, for violating the environmental legislation. And there should be different responsibility depending on the perpetration. So all those institutional reforms, this triangle, that's the basis, that's the foundation. Now, without that, we can, we can speak wonderfully or give wonderful presentations anywhere, but without that platform, we are unable to to talk about this new Ukrainian state, we cannot talk about the, color of the roof, because there we don't have the walls where this roof is to be placed, and we don't have a foundation for erecting those walls. All this architecture, it starts with this kind of a triad of these three institutional reforms. Now, Ukraine is also facing another challenge, a challenge of recovery, while at the same time of harmonization and transposition of the EU directives and control over the transposition of those requirements. And we need people for that. And we need also highly qualified experts for this. Just recently, our organization has conducted the analysis of institutional capacity of the reform of biodiversity and the transposition of the bird directive. And we've compared the number of experts in the Ministry of Environment, and we took the French and German initiative for, or German institution for preserving the biodiversity. Now, look, they have 1,600, 1,400 experts working only on the biodiversity. So that is the separate institution. We have all the personnel in the ministry is around 217. That's the total number of employees. And I think yesterday they've reduced it furthermore. So that's 217. That's a total. We're not talking about the biodiversity at all. And there's only 17 dealing with the biodiversity now. There's only 10 of them.
So the departments of natural reserves, for instance, have even fewer people, but they also have challenges to face with. And speaking of our ministry, as the Ministry of Cross-Cutting Issues that has to track the implementation of environment principles and criteria, we have this cross-cutting function. Actually, we have the highest number of functions compared with other ministries. And also, as mentioned by Tatiana in the very first panel, we need to implement other cross-cutting criteria. So comparing this with other ministries, such as the Ministry of Justice, which also has a number of cross-cutting functions and needs to assess all the legal initiatives in the country, let's see their numbers and their institutional capacity compared to ours. The same has to do with financing. This is their financing in 2024, and we actually have over 100 different functions, part of which are duplicating the functions of others in the biodiversity preservation. And in the same way, there is duplication in the field of environment control. So on the one hand, we lack human resources. On the other hand, we are duplicating the functions of others. So this is the penultimate slide with solutions. One solution is that the environment principles that we often hear about and we heard about today, they need to be implemented in the law. We need to complete the reform of the environment control and monitoring as the basic institutional reform. We need to stop the experiments and manipulations of already transpositioned directives, such as the directive on environment assessment and the strategic impact assessment. But there are some experiments that we can see, some attempts to improve the legislation that Ukraine has already reported on. We should terminate this practice of some experimental resolutions that intend to amend the scope of activity activities envisioned by the law. Simplify these procedures, thus making them invalid. So if we have all these key reforms implemented, we can avoid the social tensions, like the tensions we had with the draft law on construction on the protected areas. And despite having over 25,000 signees under the petition, we actually have now the signature of the president under this law, because of which we will lose a huge share of Ukraine's national reserves. But if we had all the necessary controls in place, we would not have even the draft law in the first place, and we would avoid having the social tensions. What we propose right now is that the green recovery and the approximation of legislation to the European Union is based on sustainability and harmony with nature. This is something that ensures for us the government of gratitude, well-developed economy, and healthy people, and clean environment, and the society that has the understanding of the priorities and the vision, and also the respect of all the stakeholders, and love for nature, and the understanding that we need to take care of it. That's the foundation of the government of gratitude.
Thank you, Elena. I'm hoping that we have Mr. Davor Perkan online. I don't know if colleagues, the technical colleagues, can give us connection. Yeah, online. Mr. Davor Perkan, yes, who is head of unit of bilateral and regional environmental cooperation in the Directorate General of Environment of the European Commission. I'm hoping that you can hear us, Mr. Perkan.
Yes, I can. Hello.
Excellent. So
I hope you can hear me. Yes.
Yes, we can, and we can see you. Perfect. So I would have a little bit the same question for you about enhancing meaningful public participation, but also a second question maybe about the legislative frameworks and policy coherence. And maybe you would like to talk about these two subjects together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to you, to all the participants. It's a great pleasure to be here in this forum, and also to participate in this panel, which is certainly extremely important. I would like to underline and agree with my previous speaker on the issue of accountability, which I think is very, very much pertinent for this process. I think that in terms of setting up legislative frameworks and policy coherence, the green recovery offers a lot of opportunities there. When we speak about the architecture of the recovery, I think that there, since we are now, and Ukraine is now embarking on the European path, this is a very good opportunity to strengthen these frameworks and policy coherence. Why? Because on the one hand, I think environment is probably one of the areas which is inevitably connected to many different work streams of many different governmental institutions. It cannot, green recovery and post-war recovery and post-war green recovery cannot be detached from housing, from construction, from things that we discussed in previous panels, from economic areas, from finances, etc. So this all needs to be taken into account holistically, what we call a whole of government and a whole of society approach, and clearly accountability towards one's own citizens needs to be a crucial part of it. So I would like to say that we are starting the basis of the architecture is the strategic framework for environmental protection. And overall, this has many aspects in different member states, but starts with environmental protection strategy, or a general economic development strategy, which is then leans towards the green. Different subsectoral strategies, such as for waste management, such as for water management, etc. Because as we know, the environmental acquis is quite complex in terms of legislation, and certainly in terms of costings, of costs. Of course, the second tier beyond the strategic framework are the plans, the implementation plans, which all need to be costed. And this is crucial because member states have access to so-called cohesion funds. And the only sure way that you can secure funding from cohesion funding is if you have a good strategic framework, good implementation plans which are costed, and have project pipelines which enable the implementation of those strategies, and define concrete projects with which you can implement those plans. Only then we come to the legal framework, and as it was mentioned, there is a high volume of legal framework under the EU environmental acquis. But without the strategies and plans and costs and project pipeline, those laws risk of serious difficulties in the implementation. And then implementation, of course, is a very important part of the overall architecture, meaning the institutional framework for implementation, and especially for enforcement of legislation, which is all adapted to the upper tiers of this pyramid, let's say. And then there is the whole issue of funding, the polluter pays principle, the national funds, etc. But those all need to be pushing in the same direction and providing service to the overall strategic framework. As I already mentioned, it is crucially important that these strategic actions are integrated, that there is a whole of government approach to that the government in its entirety is owner of this framework, and of course that there is a clear and pronounced public accountability, offering not only public consultation in the public consultation and ability of the interested publics to provide comments into the strategic framework, but also during the implementation. This is one of the crucial parts of the EU acquis on which the Commission is very much sensitive, and this is the so-called horizontal or rule of law acquis, meaning, or body of EU legislation, meaning where the rule of law legislation and the environmental legislation come together. This is on, as we heard previously, environmental assessments, but also on access to justice on environmental matters, where the judiciary has to be also capable of adjudicating in environmental matters, and also public access to policymaking documents and all the elements that enable it to perform its function. So, in a nutshell, what we are looking for is inclusive governance that can significantly strengthen these legislative frameworks and ensure policy coherence across all bodies of the governments, which facilitates a comprehensive and effective national green recovery agenda. And we will encourage as much as possible the mechanisms that are being shaped under the EU enlargement process, whether this is alignment with the environmental and other body of EU legislation, or the development of such overarching strategic instruments with clear pathways and roles of various actors in the whole process to support the effective national green recovery agenda. Thank you, and hope to answer any questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bekan. That was very enlightening, and I think that's where we start to get quite a bigger picture of the importance of the legislative layer and the coherence across the legislation and across policies, and the importance of having the public involved in this in many different ways. One element that we haven't touched upon yet is about having sound information to support a green recovery. And I know that this is something which OSCE has been working on with partners. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, Saula, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to greet, the participants, and I'm just happy that, first of all, I made it here in person, and thank you organizers for making it happen. And this is a commendable effort, so thank you for that. OSCE Economic and Environmental Affairs Division, within that division, we have a sizable portfolio of extra budgetary projects. Now, when the war started, when the large scale war started, we developed this initiative, assessment of environmental impacts of the war in Ukraine and options for remediation. Within the framework of that initiative, what we realized, even though initially we embarked on a assessment of impacts, in fact, last year, this publication was released by our partners, CEOBS Conflict and Environment Observatory and ZOE Environmental Network, which basically summarizes the environmental consequences of war that are based on the analytics conducted in 22-23. There are different sections, there are recommendations, and there is a number of recommendations that in fact outline our considerations, exactly for data coordination and management. As, for instance, even already, you even mentioned, there are walls, there are foundations for the platform that still need to be constructed, or at least validated and developed. And we consider data management to be one of those foundational stones. So there are many challenges in developing, first of all, sound, valid, and well-established data that could support green recovery platform and the type of decision-making and various aspects of project development, interventions, accountability considerations that can only be based on such data. So what we got involved in is we consulted a variety and diverse range of domestic and international stakeholders. When I say we, it was our partners, of course, implementing partners, Conflict and Environment Observatories or Environmental Network, and maybe my colleagues can raise their hands, you know, they're here as well, Nikolai and Irina, CEOBS. And so what I would encourage you to do is, of course, you know, for special questions and for individualized questions, please approach them and ask. But we faced 2 years ago a challenge of, first of all, accumulating vast informational resources. And then based on that understanding, because this is really happening as we speak, these are all pilot, you know, initiatives. We're trying to establish what can be done, what is out there, and whether this information is valid. People have tried to map data collection from different entities, institutions, and organizations. The situation is quite unique, and there is no standard model to follow. Therefore, you know, we are trying to see what type of accessible data is essential to support scientific and technical basis for green recovery. But then there is a policy and political components to be considered. So I would say if we can upload a few slides that were developed by Conflict and Environment Observatory, which outline the type of considerations that we summarized based on the initial consultations, shall we say. Last December, we undertook a first consultation, and for that, I actually have to also acknowledge Nick's role in coordinating the interagency coordination group on environmental assessments, where the group that we used to share, you know, initially these ideas. And then we received a good response. We received initial response from experts from the ministry, and we tried to formulate, you know, what could be in fact proposed. These are just initial ideas, please understand, and we would still need a comprehensive sort of response, you know, how to best continue this work. But I think it does outline good foundational structure for potential data management concept. So the initial image, this is the environmental incidents of harm in Ukraine, summarizing the 2 years of the war. And because organizations like CEOBS, like ZOE, they have been monitoring environmental change in Ukraine since 2015 and since the start of the full-scale invasion. Since last year, they have been applying what was learned to the data needs. Now, next slide. Or should I, let me, okay. There we go. To operationalize, you know, such data, the Green Recovery Platform must be built and must be informed by a robust environmental data foundation. And of course, this should be developed in lockstep with the Green Recovery Platform concept and possibly become a permanent component of it. Now, there are independent sources, there are trusted data directory and repository, which potentially could be coordinated by or hosted by governmental agencies, of course. Next slide. Sorry. 1 more minute. 1 minute. Okay, that's it. So I would then maybe just show you what it could look like. So this is just a mock-up version of it. And, you know, as you can see, for instance, it could have data, actors, knowledge, what it's all about. then the directory could comprise, conflict incidents, what the sources are, what was the impact. And for instance, if you zoom in and open up one of those, subcomponents, then it would have a specific, conflict, specific incident, and specific information that would come out with details, statistics, and indicators such as this, and even identify data gaps, for instance. And it can have different sectoral applications, including the biodiversity, energy, air quality, soils, waste, etc. For instance, we initially did sort of a small in-depth assessments into water-related impacts, hazardous facilities, or waste issues, or disaster risk reduction, and so on. So we come to the summary page, which is always what you would like to have. So one of the basic questions to ask would be, can this, for instance, data platform, data repository be information clearinghouse, so to speak, or could it be a source of information products like smaller or larger sectoral applications and so on? Then who would be contributors and users? For instance, what would be the access to this database? These are the types of questions that typically come up. There could be a portion of the database that can be open to much wider, or it could comprise of some components which are only accessible by some stakeholders. And then of course, one of the important components is to what extent that's harmonized and coordinated with other ongoing initiatives. Ideally, you would have different entry points, and the database can be maybe where contributors can include other international organizations and so on, where data can be harmonized across the scale, and where it can enable, in fact, harmonization with EU directives, where this information can actually be used for, in fact, green recovery interventions. Finally, there are wider implications overall about access to this information, because let's not forget, these are the war impacts, environmental damages. There are different ways to use that data. So all of these types of questions can be discussed with stakeholders across the working group between the ministries, and we hope that maybe we can, support initial steps for this, or to enable this process together with other organizations, and of course with Green Recovery Platform partners, most of all, because we cannot be the custodians of that type of database. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saula. If I may go back a little bit, one important element which was actually touched upon by Madam Kravchenko was institutions, and you focused very much at the national level, but of course there is much more than the national level, and we have the pleasure of having with us Mr. Oleg Pilipenko, who is head of Shevchenkova community in Mykolaiv Oblast. So over to you, please.
Доброго дня всім. Трошки розкажу з практики, з чим ми зіткнулися. Я голова Шевченка.
Hello, everyone. I will introduce to you some aspects that we have faced with in practice. I am from Mykolaiv Oblast, and a lot of you have heard about Mykolaiv Oblast protecting Odessa, but our community has become the community that protected Mykolaiv city itself. We were witnessing some very active combat actions, and we have some very specific problems as consequence of this, and let me briefly introduce some details to you. Our energy infrastructure was destroyed to a large extent. There were some communities.
Так, все, є, добре. Дуже багато було зруйнованих об'єктів, дуже багато було
We
замінованих
had a
об'єктів,
lot
і
of
деякі
facilities
населені
being
пункти були
damaged,
без
being mined.
електропостачання
Some of the
9 і 11 місяців відповідно.
population
Дуже
areas lacked electricity supply
Тому
for 9 months.
Потрібно було
Some of
приймати якісь
them
кардинальні
lacked for
рішення
11
для того,
months. So
щоб
we need to
ситуацію покращити.
take some
Е,
very
одним
cardinal
із серйозних
decisions or very
викликів
important
стало
decisions to
водопостачання,
change the
відновлення
situation for the
водопостачання
weather.
населеним пунктам.
One of significant challenges
крім
was to
зруйнованих
restore the water
водонапірних
supply to populated
башт,
areas because
крім
in
зруйнованих
in
мереж,
addition to the
серйозним викликом стали
water
блекаути
support
і
systems being
постачання
damaged,
води
we had a lot of challenges due to
населенню.
blackouts
Тому нам
that produced a lot of
вдалось залучити
sort of
донорські
challenges
кошти
in
і зробити
supplying
декілька
water to the
гібридних сонячних
population. We've
електростанцій,
managed to acquire some funds
які чесно
and
досить
to
таки
construct
серйозно
a number
виручили
of
нас, і ми стали у багатьох питаннях незалежні
recoverable
від того, що
energy
відбувається
supplies or renewable energy supplies. So we
з
become
електропостачанням
independent
із блекаутами.
to a certain degree from blackouts and
Наразі
to
таких
electric
станцій
supply.
повноцінних 10,
Currently,
в
we
цьому
already
році їх
have
буде
10
50.
stations, and this year we'll
Тобто
have
це
50
досить таки
stations
серйозний був крок.
operating on
І
the
з урахуванням
with
того,
the
що
renewable energy. That was a very significant
енергоносії
step, and considering
дорожчають,
the fact that the energy
то чим швидше
kind of
громади
resources
перейдуть
are
на
getting more
такі
expensive,
енергонезалежні
it
системи,
means that the
тим
faster the
краще.
communities will
В
transfer
цьому
to the
році ми
energy
навіть декілька
independent
встановлень
systems,
невеликих
the better.
вітряків
This
на
year
5
we're
кіловат.
planning
Тобто,
to
крім енергії сонця,
install
також енергія
a
вітру.
few small
Другим
wind
серйозним викликом
energy
для нас було те,
facilities
що
for 5 kilowatt each.
величезна
The other
кількість
challenge we
замінованих,
had was that
пошкоджених
a very
об'єктів,
significant amount of
деякі школи
damaged
довелося
facilities
демонтувати, і ми їх
were very damaged. Some of the
демонтовували
schools had to be
трошки за таким, ну,
kind of,
скажімо так, по-правильному.
destroyed
Тобто
completely
ми
because they were
зробили
severely
сортування,
damaged.
тому що
And
були
we kind of
і,
did the destruction in a proper
залишки
manner. We
меблів,
did some sorting because there were
металу,
some
металопластикові
debris
вікна,
of the furniture, of
ну,
metal,
зрозуміло, що найбільша
plastic
фракція це
windows, and surely
бетонні конструкції,
most of them were
цегла.
concrete
Після
construction,
того,
bricks,
як ми
etc.
зробили це
So
сортування
when we
і
did the
демонтували ці
sorting,
об'єкти,
when we kind of
стало
dismantled
питання
those
з
facilities,
тим,
the
що
next
робити
question we
далі
faced
з
was
оцим
what to do next
всім.
with all of
Зараз
that
в цьому році
debris.
буде реалізовано два проекти в нас.
This
і
year we're going to
однією
implement
з
two
умовою,
projects. Now, one of
побудови
the
цих об'єктів
conditions
це
for the construction of
використання,
those premises would be to
повторно
use
залишки від руйнувань, тобто
those debris,
той
those
щебінь
construction
і пісок, який утвориться після переробки, він буде
kind of
повторно використаний при побудові нових
residues.
об'єктів.
So
Я думаю, що це
we'll be using them at the construction of
найбільш
new
правильна,
facilities. I
напевно,
think that would be
стратегія
the best
для громад
strategy, the most correct
у
strategy for the
відбудові.
communities in the recovery
По-перше, це
process.
здешевлює
Well, that
вартість будматеріалів,
reduces
по-друге,
the
це допомагає їх
cost of the
реально
construction materials, and
утилізувати,
it helps
ну,
to dispose
найбільш правильним методом.
the construction waste in the most
Наступним
proper
моментом,
way.
який
The next
стало
aspect,
у відбудові житлового
in
фонду для
terms of the
населення, це те,
recovery
що
of the housing,
дахи у
for
людей
the population is that
були
the
всі з шиферу,
most of the
шифер містив
roofs
азбест, тобто залишки ми
were
зібрали
constructed with
і,
materials
вони
containing
поки
asbestos.
що просто знаходяться на
So
таких полігонах, де
we
ми його
kind of
завезли.
gathered
Зрозуміло, що це
those
набагато складніше з утилізацією, тому
on the
що
landfills
там
separately,
серйозні виклики, але
and we understand that disposal of
заміна,
that is very
зруйнованих
challenging
дахів
because
відбулася
that the
якраз таки
replacement of the
прогресивним чином,
damaged
тобто,
roofs was done in a
всі люди
progressive
отримали
manner.
безазбестовий
meaning
шифер,
All of
і
the people
зараз,
have
якби,
received
ну,
special
коли
roofing
заїжджаєш в ці
materials
населені пункти,
without
то
the
одразу бачиш просто
asbestos.
нові
So now,
дахи.
whenever
і ти
you
розумієш,
are
що
coming
це
to any
зроблено
populated areas, you can see that
Ще одним
the roofs
серйозним
are
викликом
made of materials
для
without
нас
asbestos,
стало
which is right. The other
відновлення
challenge
водопостачання саме
was to
систем мереж.
restore the
Дуже
networks
багато
for
сільських
water supply.
територій
There's a lot of rural
колись
areas,
традиційно в радянські роки
and traditionally during the Soviet period
робили
of time,
водопостачання з азбестових труб.
the water
Це було
supply
нормально тоді,
was
тоді просто не
provided
знали
by
про
the
деякі моменти.
tubes and pipelines made of
після,
asbestos or carrying or asbestos
Серйозних
containing
бомбардувань
materials.
цих населених пунктів
After the
зрозуміло, що стара
shelling
система азбестова,
of those
вона
populated
просто
areas,
тріснула,
it became clear that the
і
old
тому
system made of the materials with asbestos has damaged. So there's no other option but to install a new piping system made of plastic. It's difficult when there's a lack of employees. It's hard to find the sources for doing that, but hard doesn't mean that it's impossible. So we've replaced over 40 kilometers of water pipelines. This is, I think, the largest replacement of the water pipeline system in my community for the past 40 years. So whenever you're installing those networks in a wise manner, after proper analysis, you are reducing you're making sure the water is used in a more effective manner. Now, the stations that we've installed, the management is done in a proper manner. And for example, if we're using any batteries, the personnel can see whether the batteries are charged with the solar energy. If there is any error, they can correct the error if necessary. So this is the experience that we're sharing for the neighboring communities. And this is the experience that will allow every community to become energy independent, more efficient. And in future, we should have a decentralized generation. The more stations we'll have in future, the better. So that's it. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Коротке питання.
I have a question.
Вся система
The whole
енергозабезпечення,
energy
вона
supply
підключалась
system,
до
was
розподільчих
that
мереж
connected to
обленерго,
distribution
чи,
networks of
власну мережу
Obelenерgo,
розбудовували?
or you've developed your own network? That was all from Oberenergo, that is the regional energy supply system. At first, it was an emergency system. We found the remnants of the cables and tried to correct them, and that existed for 2 years. Right now, we're replacing all those into CIPs, so that's one of the good examples, but we did this in cooperation with the other stakeholders. During the sessions, we decided to reduce the land tax by 4 times for the facilities of Obelenерgo. We reduced that from 12% to 3%. So we made this step towards them, and they made a step towards them. So that's a normal cooperation, and I would like to say that in those populated areas where we've laid down that equipment, the questions around the quality of the electric current is no more, so we have a much better quality of the electric current. Then, considering that we are located in between of the Mykolaiv and Kherson, and the Kherson region lost its Kakhovka HPP for a very significant period of time, if not, eternally. So now there's the question, that those 2 cities should be receiving more energy in a more balanced way. We did the assessment of the territories right now that we can allocate for the construction of the solar power plant. I mean, a more powerful one with the capacity of 20 megawatts or something. So these land plots are properly registered, and we try to make sure whether it's better directed towards the south, and investors could take a look whether this territory is something of an interest to them or not.
And very impressive as well. We have 2 quick interventions online. I don't know if they're technical guys. Hi. We have two people online. Karl Bruch. Yeah, and then it will be Gerhard Pulfer. And they have just very quick interventions. I hope. Please go ahead, Carl. Okay, I don't think you can hear us. You can't hear us. Okay, maybe we can jump ahead to Mr. Carl Gerhard.
It was not letting me unmute. I can unmute now. Thank you all. Sorry for not being there in person. My comments really build on the previous comments and focusing on the rule of law, especially in the environmental context. And I think there are two key things to think about. The first is the political will that Ukraine has developed over the last 25, 30 years, a lot of good environmental laws. The question is, when there's all this demand to rebuild, to do it now, to do it while the funding is there, the question is, how do you also ensure that the laws are followed? And I think that this is not just a technical question of having the laws, it's really a political will question. The other is actually a technical question, and that is thinking about the laws that are currently on the books or the laws that are needed for the acquis. Where might there need to be some adjustments? For example, do you need to do an environmental impact assessment for all these projects? If you have to do it, do you have the staff to review it? Maybe there are some more minor projects that could be done, that could be managed in a slightly different way through what we might call a programmatic EIA, or certain exemptions that if they are doing X, Y, and Z, that that it's okay to proceed without an EIA. But the issue is going to be, if we want to build back better, and it's not just building back what was there, but we want to build back better, that's not just building back. And so how do you expedite the EIA process in a way that is still respecting the rule of law? So this also applies to hazardous waste, to asbestos, to a lot of other laws where the sheer size of the task risks overwhelming the capacity of the institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Maybe Elena would like to answer that in a moment, but while she's thinking about it, maybe we have a speaker, Gerhard Pulver.
Yeah, hello.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for having me briefly on this panel. It was a very interesting discussion. My name is Gerhard Pulver and I'm from Environment Agency Austria. We are the lead for a consortium that implements a new EU program. It's called EU for Green Recovery East, which was launched in Ukraine on 12th of March with the Deputy Minister, Olga Yukimchuk. And we think that related to the subject of this discussion, the implementation of the EU acquis, particularly Chapter 27, is already a leap forward towards Ukraine green recovery agenda. So I think with the implementation of the EU acquis, it would be very helpful in laying the foundations for the green recovery of Ukraine. And what we can do to support this is to basically support compliance checks for draft legal acts under Chapter 27. We can also cost such legislation and the implementation of such legislation, as was mentioned earlier. So this is something where we can offer support. And it's not only the transposition, but it's also the compliance and the enforcement mechanisms that we can help to promote with technical assistance. So we stand ready to work with Ukraine over the next 3.5 years until the end of 28, basically, to lay the foundations for Ukraine's green recovery. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you, Gerhard. I don't know if Elena wants to react to what Karl Bruch was saying, but of course there are,
Ila, but
yeah, I mean, there are other ways. If things are within plans and programs, then of course you can use tools such as strategic environmental assessment, which would be a more efficient way of just dealing with large numbers of similar projects. But perhaps you would like to say something briefly, please.
Позиція нашої команди стосовно
well, the
стратегічних
position of our
інвестицій
team with
не
regards
тільки
to the
про
strategic
Надія,
environmental appraisal and the
чітке
assessment
незмінно.
of environment
Ніяких відступів
impact, it's clear
бути
there
не
could be
може.
no
Жодна з
derogations.
країн,
Not
які
a
вступали
single
в Європейський
country
Союз, не мала ніяких вимог.
joining EU had no
Крок за кроком,
exemptions.
згідно з планом,
There's like
мало
step by step,
відбутися
in accordance to the
інвестиції,
plan,
впровадження
the
і
transposition
контроль за
should be
тим, як
taking
воно,
place and the
впроваджується.
control over the
Станом на зараз ми маємо
implementation.
низку
As of now,
відступів від
we have a
ОВД,
number
що
of
могло б від
derogations,
стратегічної екологічної
and
оцінки
they were
оцінки
also
впливу на довкілля,
derogations from the
які були
strategic
зроблені в
environmental
березні 2022 року
assessment
при
made in
закритих
March
дверях парламенту.
2022
Без будь-якого
was the parliament
доступу до
working
цієї
behind the closed doors.
інформації,
There was no
без
access to
будь-якої
this
участі
information. There was
громадськості,
no
без
involvement of the
врахування
society
думки громадськості.
without
І
taking into
лише
account the
випадково,
the
моніторячи
thoughts
вже
of the public
прийняті
society.
акти,
And simply by chance, while
експертна
monitoring
громадськість
the
з'ясувала,
regulations
що
passed, the expert
відступи
community
раптом
realized
існують.
that
Далі
for some
почалися
reason the
експериментальні
derogations appeared.
постанови.
Then there were
Тобто
some
наш уряд
experimental
придумав
regulations,
красиве
meaning
слово, якого
that
немає
our
в
government
національному
came up with a very
законодавстві,
interesting word,
природоохоронному,
which is not
експериментальне.
existent
І в нас пішла
in the
експериментальна,
environmental
вироблений
regulation.
крок.
There's experimental.
Каховський
Then we had this
АЕС. У нас пішло
experimental recovery
експериментальне
of the Kakhovka
будівництво
HPP. We
військово-меморіального
had the
комплексу,
experimental
який
construction of the
жорстко,
military memorial
розділив
complex.
не просто уряд і
And
громадськість,
there's a
а
very
навіть
clear
різні
division
групи
between of the
громадськості
government and
між
society and a
собою,
very different
оскільки
groups of the
військово-меморіальний
society
комплекс
because the
має
military
бути. Це
memorial
наша
complex
шана, це
it
наша
should be
вдячність.
constructed. That's our
Але
honor,
він
that's
має
our gratitude, but it has to be constructed in accordance to the procedures. As the ancient Roman have said that there is dura lex et lex.
Дурний
principle.
закон, але закон. Так?
Well,
І якщо ми маємо
if we have the law of Ukraine on the assessment of environmental impact, then there cannot be experimental construction that involves cutting forest in area which is going to be like the reserve area. So I think that we have to be, speaking honestly, all the reforms that will be an area of discomfort for all the stakeholders. That's a difficult process of dialogue and searching for a consensus, but you need to take this difficult path like frankly and not report to the government on certain reforms and then silently try to do derogations without the involvement of the civil society that is working round the clock on the development of our country and making it closer to the EU. Thank you. Greetings, Lydia Shimon. If I have a chance to ask this question, I'd like to make it a practical question to the panelists. The situation is the following. Should we talk about the recovery and rebuilding Ukraine in an environmentally safe and friendly manner? Then we have to mention that the use of any eco materials should be based on the legislation and the construction norms. And you would need to have a certification that the manufacturers are not willing to do because it's not kind of favorable for them. So who should be taking this financial burdens to recover? Because the state is not ready. The international organizations are not willing to fund this type of expenditures. And how should we subordinate to the European standards if we're willing to be in Europe, which this commitment of using materials
слідувати таким як стандартам, але ми хочемо.
Because at certain point we are
Тому,
unable to
а,
comply with the standards,
це
but we're
такий
really
як
willing
замкнутий
to. So it's kind of a
в тому,
closed
де
circle. Now,
додатні
who
функції.
can answer this kind of question?
Да, дуже плутано ви розповіли.
Yeah,
Ми
that was
хочемо, ми не можемо, можемо,
Kind
ми
of
не
a
хочемо.
challenging
Це ми
question, like
можемо.
we want, but
По-перше,
we
дивіться,
can't. Well, we can
минула
everything.
панель,
Look,
яка була,
the
да,
previous
Світлана
panel we
Беркут,
had.
Всеукраїнська громадська організація «Жива
yes.
планета», але саме
Sloan Beckman.
в період з початку
look,
війни ми
since
сфокусувалися
the
саме
beginning
на
of the war,
будівництві.
we focused
цього ми
on the
займалися дуже
construction.
активно
Before that, we
стандартизацією, в
were
тому
actively
числі
working on the
розуміючи, що
standardization,
таке екологічно будівельні
while
матеріали, тому що
understanding what
різні
are the environmentally safe construction
роблять для себе
materials,
свої уяви, що таке
because
екологічні будівельні
there's
матеріали, але
different, you know,
насамперед є
approaches
стандарти,
to
які
that notion,
визначають
but
для
there are
різних
standards
категорій будівельної продукції,
that
що
clearly
таке екологічно,
set
там, наприклад, бетон або
the
екологічні там
like the standards. What is
гіпсокартон і таке
environmentally
інше.
safe concrete or
І виробники, вони
or
можуть,
others?
ті,
So the
які хочуть бути
manufacturers,
більш
I mean,
кращі,
those
ніж інші.
who are
Тобто
willing
це
to
питання
be better than
конкуренції,
others. So
розумієте?
it's a
Тобто
matter of
виробник,
competition.
він прагне,
The
нормальний виробник,
manufacturer,
він
I mean, the
прагне
normal one,
до високого
strives
рівня
for
конкурентності.
a
Висока
high level of
конкурентність – це
competitiveness.
висока додана
And
вартість.
it's all
Це
about
його
the added
гроші.
value. It's
Тобто
his
такі
money.
виробники, вони можуть
So
вижити в
these
нормальних,
manufacturers can
умовах
survive
ринку.
under normal
Виробники,
market
які
conditions.
залишилися
The
в Совєтському
manufacturers
Союзі,
who still
які
live in the Soviet
орієнтуються виключно там на
time
державний
era,
норматив і
who
не хочуть більш
only
нічого,
looking at the
мертвий
state
виробник.
construction
Він не
norms.
виживе
These
в
are,
умовах
bad
нормального
manufacturers. They will
І
not
вони вже
survive
зараз,
under
не
normal
виживають.
market
Ну,
conditions.
якщо
So
ми
even
станемо
now,
членом
they're struggling
Європейського
to
Союзу, вони
survive.
теж
So
не
if
виживуть.
we are
Тепер питання, хто должен
becoming a
заплатити
member
за
of the
що?
EU,
За
they will not survive.
сертифікацію
Now,
чи
who will have
пока?
to pay for what? For
Дивіться,
certification?
вартість
That's nonsense.
сертифікації
Look,
стоїть
the
копійки.
cost of the
Порів-
certification, it's kind of
А
just
це
a,
великі гроші
just a few
для
cents.
малого бізнесу?
is that a
Ні,
big money for a
я
small
хочу
business?
сказати, є
Look,
приклади з моєї практики.
there's
Наприклад,
already examples in
коли
my own
виробник
experience when the
невеликий, 9
manufacturer, a
робітників
small
виробництва
manufacturer
було,
made of
вони
9
виробляли
employees,
продукцію, яку
they
вони
were
вибрали для
producing
себе в
some
якості
products
орієнтира
that they've
та робили
selected
екологічні стандарти.
uh,
Вони
um,
пройшли
like
екологічну
based on
сертифікацію,
the
яка надала
quality
можливість,
standards. They've
ну,
passed the
на відповідність
environmental
міжнародним
certification
стандартам.
process
І
to verify the
нормально
compliance with international standards.
надавати цю продукцію як екологічну на
So
українському
they
ринку.
wanted to make sure
Потім
they're providing
експорт.
quality products to Ukrainian
Зараз це
market.
виробник,
Then the
який
export. Now it's the
випускає
manufacturer
понад 200
that produces
ICQ
over
і експортує в
200
35
ICQ
країн
and
світу.
exports in
І він
35
не каже,
countries
що
of the
йому
world.
було
And they're
дорого
not
пройти
saying that it
екологічну
was
сертифікацію.
expensive for them
Тому
to
що він в
have the
голові
environmental
своїй,
certification,
коли він
because
займався виробництвом,
in their
дизайном
mind,
цієї
when they were
продукції,
dealing
він
with the
ставився
construction
до
design of this
екологічного
product,
стандарту
so
не
back
як
then,
до бар'єру.
they considered the
Це
environmental
вартість
standards
високої
not as the
сертифікації,
barrier
тому що
or an
дуже
obstacle
багато
or the
виробників
cost of the
вважають,
certification
що
process, because
веде
we have a
проект
lot of
бумажки,
manufacturers,
яку хтось
because
розробити, скільки
they think
стоїть,
it's a
щоб
cost
його
of a paper
отримати,
because
а
someone
є
will make
зробити
for
так,
them
щоб отримати.
in order to get
Сертифікація
it.
– це вартість бумажки.
Certification, it's a
Така
cost of a
за
piece of
бумажку
paper.
10 тисяч
Yes,
дорого.
like
10 тисяч
10,000
не
for a piece of
вартує
paper is
така
expensive.
сертифікація.
The
Ви
environmental
орієнтуєте
certification
вартість
is not the,
сертифікації
well, shouldn't be
на 10
hosting
разів.
that, because that's kind of
Ще
10
тоді,
times
коли я цим
higher
займався,
than
ви мені кажете,
than
ви
it should be. I'm dealing with that. So
це, 10
so
тисяч,
it's
що, вартість
10,000.
сертифікації?
is that the cost of the
Питання, можливо,
certification?
не в
The
сертифікації.
question, it maybe it's
А
not about the
в
certification.
досягненні вимог цього стандарту.
It's about the requirements to the standard.
Доброго дня всім. Мене звати Максим Кривошей,
Good
Українська рада із
evening. My name is Maxim Krivoshay, Ukraine Green Council. But
So it's a very interesting presentation regarding the data, but could you please maybe highlight or example what kind of data can we get? For example, city of Kyiv, because it is impacted by everyday, not every day, but every month for sure hits. And for city Bakhmut, for example, as city occupied, because for me, it's definitely useful tool, but maybe as a practitioner, what kind of data can we get, if I may? Thank you very much.
Maybe I can answer.
Yes, thank you. Nicola Denis of Zoe Environment Network. We are one of the collaborators of the OSCE, so I can talk about us, but in fact, there are different data streams which are available. As far as we are concerned, we have a platform which is called EcoDozor, which is monitoring the impacts, the war impacts at the level of settlements, so that's what we're asking about, and at the level of industrial infrastructure and critical facilities. So basically, from the beginning of the war, well, actually from the war in Donbass, but definitely from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we have been collecting directly and also through other sources like international databases like ACLED, fairly known, thousands of records of incidents at the level of settlements in particular. So for example, for the city of Kiev, city of Bakhmut, definitely this data are available. It's a public resource, it's accessible directly. And also we provide the records at particular sort of valid requests if somebody wants sort of deeper analysis. So that is possible from our side.
I think maybe you should, just to illustrate, you know, I think this
Yeah.
this will help
you.
exactly visibly, you know, what does it look like? While they're doing it, I will just add what I was talking about also, that based on this and other databases, I think the idea would be to have a bit more comprehensive effort, which would accumulate all of the data in one sort of database that can support green recovery, because there are all of those separate efforts that I think next step is to actually harmonize and integrate that, so that maybe it would help, in fact, both the government, you know, industry and so on, multi-stakeholder effort to address design interventions and address actually the impacts, because and multi-use can be in all sorts of ways, but I think integrated data approach should absolutely be the next step, so that you don't need to consult various individual sources and try to formulate, you know, general picture, because I think government should play a role in coordinating validation process of such data. And that's an absolute fact, with the help of environmental inspectorates, you know, in coordination with the Ministry of Defense and across other ministries. So please.
Yes, no, indeed. And of course, we should remember the war goes on. So, for example, we do not provide the geographic locations precisely just to avoid access to sensitive information. But I mean, there always can be found a balance. And speaking, I mean, going back to the pre-war situation, and I think I also referred to what Olena was talking about, the system of environmental governance, which is fairly complicated indeed. Not only in Ukraine, it's many countries, but this is an example of Ukraine, only related to environmental information. Only. It's not the whole environmental governance, it's only where data flows are going. And you can see how many different agencies are involved in the collection of similar and related data. So this is the experience of the pre-war projects to try to help Ukraine build the so-called shared environmental information system. SAIS, it was done by the European Environment Agency. We were helping that. And I think one lesson which this has shown is that it's actually possible to start to help the environmental authorities move closer together, at least to handle environmental data, environmental statistics, environmental reporting. So this is one dimension, but this was possible. There was an interagency working group which was actually talking, and the agents were exchanging information, which is a big step. And I think if you go beyond the domain of environmental information, this experience can also be useful. It can be used after the war to help build a more streamlined institutional landscape, the one which would be more efficient. And if you show the next slide, one way of doing that is actually to strengthen the cooperation with the European Environment Agency. Ukraine can become a full member even before it joins the European Union. So it is possible to start doing things as a member of the European Environment Agency on the environmental side, advancing the membership in the EU. And in fact, this is the tweet from 2020. Already then, Ukraine started exchanging air quality information with EEA. If it becomes a full member, it will not only cover air quality, it will cover all other data streams which are used in European environmental reporting. So one of the lessons from our side is that I think it is about time now to states to make moves in order for Ukraine to become the full member as part of the EU negotiations, but actually it's not necessary. It can be done before that. And I think that would be very helpful for environmental governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, before I give the microphone again, is Kostiatin Gura in the room? Ah, excuse me, because I promised you to have intervention.
Yeah, okay. So I supposed to have short intervention, Nick. Say, thank you for giving me a word. First of all, it's a pleasure to see you here in person. Then I switch to Ukrainian, okay? В якості intervenції з мого
So,
боку.
as an intervention from me, let me show the following. I listened attentively to all the colleagues speaking in the first session as well. And of course, UGRP is the right idea. And I respect the team and stakeholders all working to develop this platform. That's the basis for green recovery. It is great that we heard from Svetlana Grinchuk the idea that the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian parliament is working on the law identifying what the green recovery is. That's what we still lack. And as a representative for the research community, as the head of the Sustainable Solutions Center in the Shevchenko University, I'd like to share that researchers and the academia are ready to take part in drafting of the legislation, and specifically our center is ready to participate. And as a representative of Ukraine in UN's EU emergency, well, I'd say that we need to develop recovery energy and decentralized generation, which will make our network safer and more reliable. And that's, of course, the issue of national security. Unfortunately, we've had the war since 2014, but only 9 billion euro were used to develop this field. So, of course, making investments into this field also means opportunities for Ukraine's economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to separate renewable energy from questions around green recovery. It's so interwoven. I think someone wanted to react to the presentation, well, intervention before by Nikolai. Yeah, please.
I have a question for Ms. Sole. You mentioned, the question is, did your data is available for public, and do you have some API or something to test this data and make some research on it? And if this data have some metadata, and maybe it's harmonized with European requirement, maybe some inspired directive. Is it?
Thank you.
So I would like to provide
microphone.
Does it? Okay. Just a little qualifier. So, of course, for instance, ICADOSOR database, that's public access database. But for instance, Conflict and Environment Observatory, database of environmental damages with exactly listings, countless listings of incidents and so on and so forth, which is quite also vast, quite significant. I think it does still require, And all of these databases require validation steps, because I think while the war is happening, it is, some of it is validated, some of it isn't. And I think that's exactly the point, that the next steps should include this more integrated approach and a more comprehensive validation, mechanism in coordination with the government agencies and so on. I think while it is happening, while it is vast, but it is difficult to validate it on the spot, because what it does require is consultations, data checks and so on in reality in those locations. And then of course, with the use of, for instance, environmental inspectors, and other, relevant agencies. So I think that's the type of work that has to happen in order to, in fact, have that credible and valid, database. So, and this can only be done if the effort, becomes a bit more coordinated, unified, and also coordinated through the government, agencies. However, while we are on it, what is possible now is at least to have some illustrations and some, mappings that give you an idea what is actually happening. And, it accumulates and it provides you an overall, let's say, snapshot of what is the trend, what are the approximate numbers, and so on and so forth. Digitalization, that still has to happen. And I think this is one of those, efforts that will be ongoing, and it has to be ongoing, so that the future steps, whether it be in green recovery, whether it be in acting on the, damages, et cetera, that accountability mechanisms and so on, that they can be based on this credible, valid, and data. So, thank you.
Я маю коротенький
I
питання.
have a brief
В
question.
Україні існує
Here in
екозагроза.
Ukraine, we
В Україні
have
існує
environment
загальна
threats,
екосистема,
and we
яка
also have
має містити
the
частково містить
general
різні кадастри,
ecosystem of different cadastres of forestry, of the air, etc., and MRIA, and also, well, and there is eco threat. This is something that many central authorities in the government are working on, the Ministry of Environment and others, and also a number of civil society organizations specializing in IT. There are chatbots that we are skilled in using. And so there is a big part of cooperation here, and also there is the International Registry of Losses of Ukraine. It is in The Hague, and the Ministry of Justice was taking care of it. And there is also a number of civil society initiatives. We, for instance, have a system that is similar to yours. Ecodia has a similar system. A number of other environment organizations have similar systems. So here's my question. Where do you see the role of your system in this full landscape of systems? What about the owner of this system? Should it be the government of Ukraine, represented by the Ministry of Environment? And what about the controlling bodies? They also have to have access to this. What about the Ministry of Defense? Do you work with them? Because despite the need to make all the environment information open in the wartime, we have to limit access to some of this information. So do you work with the Ministry of Defense and others to make sure that data is protected from the enemy?
So Just a very brief response because it's connected to what I already mentioned earlier. Even those databases that you referred to, including the ones generated by the Ministry of Justice, these are all connected efforts already because some of them took it from ICADOZOR database or, CEOBS assisted, in generating the same cases, shall we say, and operationalization of incidents and so on. So because of all these efforts, I think that's exactly the next step. And that's what we are trying to propose to the ministry, that the next step is to coordinate all of these different efforts and maybe make it into at least a comprehensive effort to connect all of these, databases, of which primary are the ones that I already mentioned. And so that just to say, this is the public access, for instance, there is a whole domain of public access data, but then there are, of course, those special cases where, perhaps some of it has more to do with accountability, which might in fact end up being more closed, to the public or partially open. And so all of these different, rules need to be determined by, ministry in coordination with the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Justice, and so on. But these are the types of steps that need to be taken. So I think we all look forward to, and I'm not speaking only on behalf of our, initiative, but in connection, all these initiatives of our partners, that the next step is to have the discussion with the ministry and determine what to focus this effort on, so that we can optimize, our support as well for this effort, and we can basically help as much as we can, to contribute to Ukraine's green recovery, as is coordinated by the government and other stakeholders. That's why I think it's commendable, that this first stakeholders forum, I hope it continues, and this discussion not only continues, but actually brings some results. So, and we are supporting this effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very good question, because it's one we've been asking ourselves a lot, is how to bring all of these different data sources together and make them available in a structured way. I think we should probably come to a conclusion. I just wonder if Mr. Perkan would like to intervene again from the European Commission. I don't know.
Yes, in fact, thank you, Nicholas. I had my hand raised. A couple of comments. Very interesting panel and very interesting exchange of information. So I'm very pleased to be part of it. On data, where we were also, I think one of the colleagues there mentioned the European Environment Agency, and in fact, Ukraine, there are already the process of making Ukraine a cooperating country under within the European Environmental Agency are already underway. So I think that for that part, we have seen this opportunity and are acting on that. And indeed, the European Environment Agency is both through the SEIS and the also other data collecting and processing, environmental data collecting and processing work that it does, it will be an asset also for Ukraine. The other comment I wanted to make, and was the one on when the discussion was framed around environmental rule of law and EIA and SEA, and it was I think a question also online from, if I'm not correct, Mr. Brujo, or excuse me if I got the name wrong. There, okay. So there, I would like to point out that indeed the EU's Environmental Impact Assessment Directive and the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive both do have exceptions and do allow for exceptions. However, not in the form that they are currently applied in Ukraine. We do not have, and the directive does not recognize blanket countrywide derogation, and this is one thing that is very problematic. And of course, this is part of our discussions with the Ukrainian colleagues, the government. But yes, the environmental impact assessment directive, the strategic environmental, and all of these horizontal directives make a direct connection between rule of law and the environmental legislation, and hence this is an extremely sensitive manner, and one to which the European Commission is very much attached to. Over, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we should probably be concluding, and I think we don't actually have to rush, but I think that maybe it's a good moment to take a bit of a break. I think the next room, they're even more behind than we are. But it's been very interesting, many insights. I think our panel have been really very helpful. And I would just like to invite you to join me in thanking the panelists, but also you for joining in as well. Thank you very much.